Welcome to Harper Fox Trailblazer Talks. In today's episode, we're discussing equality in the workplace and are joined by Alonge, founder and CEO of data-driven equality, diversity and inclusion tech company, The Equal Group. So Mac, tell us about your journey and how you came to found The Equal Group.
So basically my background's in the energy market, so I spent 10 years as a regulatory consultant, worked for KPMG, National Grid, UK government, Scottish government, and when I first entered the industry it was a very pale male stale environment, and at first I thought it was something that would just change naturally over time. I think entry level positions were quite diverse, so my expectation was that diversity would filter through. So I kind of got my head down, worked really hard. I managed to progress, moved on to kind of manage some really high profile projects. But over the 10 years I grew quite frustrated because I wasn't seeing diversity reflected in leadership. So my role was to help senior leaders with their strategic objectives, so looking at the regulatory landscape, identifying qualitative and quantitative data, and demonstrating what the environment would look like in 5, 10, 15 years into the future. And really just started having conversations with leaders just to say, look, do you see diversity and inclusion as an issue? Is it something you're aware of? And if so, what needs to be done? And they were aware of it, they did see it as a problem, but there was a little bit of a political fear, so people didn't necessarily want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. So people's kind of default position was to let's just see what happens, wait and see, and that wasn't good enough for me. So I grew a bit frustrated, and we birthed the Equal Group out of those conversations. And really, we were looking at kind of the industry and seeing what were the issues that people were facing, and what we found very quickly was that there was a lack of data. So people weren't necessarily tracking what was going on in a meaningful way from an equality, diversity and inclusion perspective.
Okay, that's absolutely incredible, thank you. So can I just go back a little bit? I think first of all we know that the energy sectors, well actually dominantly across most sectors, let's be honest, but particularly within energy and engineering, it is typically very white, very male. So initially, what even attracted you to the industry?
So I don't think there was an initial attraction. I went into the working environment in 2008, around the time of the financial crash. So really I was just looking for a job, just didn't want to be unemployed. Sending out hundreds of CVs, hundreds of applications, and got a phone call one day asking, what do you know about the energy sector, and how appealing is it to you? And I lied, I was like, I love the energy sector, I love everything about it.
All for energy.
Exactly. Got a call back, went to the interview, and found myself with a job. And it was only probably after a year or two in that role that I started seeing a future for myself within the sector. I've always been interested in economics, always been interested in business, and I found an environment where I could apply myself and really learn about things that I'd never really had any understanding of.
Okay, amazing. And so then fast forward, and you actually thought, I need to do something really, I want to kind of be part of the change effectively. And you said that you went on and founded the Equal Group. What did that look like? Was it that you were having those conversations internally with your current workplace and then you kind of broke away, or were they involved?
Not really. So I guess the conversations came from personal relationships that I built up with leaders within the sector. It wasn't at my workplace at that time, but through kind of personal connection, personal networks. And I guess I started the Equal Group with a couple of individuals that saw the issue the way that I saw it, looked at the future and said, actually, this is something that needs to change in a significant way. A lot of the frustration was that we were moving into a time when people were thinking about equality, diversity and inclusion, but not from a meaningful point of view. It was quite tokenistic, thinking about kind of just having one female in the room or one person of colour in the room. And for me, that didn't sit right. I've walked into many rooms over the years, and I've never wanted to walk into a room and feel like I'm only there because of the colour of my skin. I know that I have a lot to add. I know that I've got a lot to give to either an organisation or an industry, and I wanted a means to make sure that the next generation didn't necessarily have to go through the same things that we go through.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think I can totally relate to that. And I remember going into a very different environment, a very big kind of global corporate recruitment environment, and identifying really quickly that nobody looked like me, nobody had the same life circumstances as me, and probably nobody could relate to the life that I actually had at home and some of my own upbringing, and actually looking to the top, because I was super ambitious and thinking, someone that looks like me, or someone that's got two very young children at the time as well, and thinking, can I really get to where my CEO is? Is that possible for someone like me? Because it's just not there at the moment. And I think that's what alerted my attention to thinking there needs to be some change here, because if not, I'm not going to get to where I need to get to.
Yeah, definitely. I think the same frustrations were kind of what I observed in my life as well. I've always, like yourself, been super ambitious.
Yeah.
And I looked up and I saw a kind of sea of aging, middle-aged white men.
Yeah.
And couldn't really relate to them. And there was a lot of kind of individuals that had been to private school in Oxford and Cambridge, and I went to neither of those. So you start to question yourself and think, do I have the means to get to that position? And when you start to break it down, it's like, is it a question of talent? Is it a question of aptitude? Or is it a question of who you know and what school you went to, and kind of the networks that you've built up over a number of years?
Absolutely, and how things have always been done.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a huge transition, a very brave transition, actually, going from corporate to founding a new business. So tell us a little bit about that transition.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a huge transition. I guess I was in a blessed position to be earning quite a lot of money within the energy sector. But I think one day I had a realisation that I don't want my life to just be about the money.
Yes.
And I could have carved out a very lucrative career for myself, doing what I do within the energy sector, but I wanted to do something more meaningful.
Yeah.
Again, as we discussed, I saw the issue, I saw the challenges. I've always been kind of looking towards the next generation in terms of what is our legacy going to be. What do we leave to the people coming up after us? And for me, I had to take that jump out to say, if something fundamental doesn't change, then we're going to be left handing over the same legacy over and over again.
Same baton.
And I think back to kind of my dad's journey. He came to this country 40 odd years ago, came with experience, came with education, but was told that the experience and education didn't count because it was Nigerian experience. And so he went about re-educating himself, went to university, got a PhD, ended up working within local government, and his career ended in employment tribunal. So he took his employer to employment tribunal for racial discrimination, won the case, but I was reflecting on some of the things that he experienced within the workplace, some of the challenges, and they were experiences that I faced as well. So training up junior members of the team and those individuals surpassing you, being passed up for promotion, microaggressions within the workplace as well. And for me, it's a case of if we don't firmly and intentionally change some of these things, it's just never going to change.
Yeah, no, I'm in total agreement with you. And I think what you said there is just so powerful, actually, on a number of different things. And we'll go into perhaps some of the EDI stuff in a moment, actually. But just around, it sounds as though actually the founding of the Equal Group was very much purpose-led, and how powerful that is. And do you think that for somebody founding a business, or perhaps more of an entrepreneur, that there needs to be sort of that purpose behind it, rather than maybe it just being a money-orientated exercise?
I think it's funny. I think a lot of people always attribute that mentality to startups, but I think it should apply for every business. Every business should have a purpose.
Yeah.
Our lives aren't just about making money, and well, my personal opinion is that our lives aren't just about making money. I think even when I've been in the corporate world, I've wanted to work for organisations that do something other than just make money. Making money shouldn't be the be-all and end-all. Yeah. We have to strive to add positive value to the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think unless we're doing that, it becomes a little bit self-defeating and also a little bit limiting. I think for me, a company's sustainability is intrinsically tied to their purpose.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. And then you just really candidly actually just shared about your father's story there and touched upon it. I suppose, how did that then affect you when you were experiencing some of the same things that he had experienced?
To be completely honest, I didn't at the time. I was experiencing kind of most of the issues that I faced in terms of microaggressions and kind of discrimination. I hadn't really spoken in depth to my dad about his experience, and I think there's a common thing within people that are facing discrimination, that you're not very vocal about it. You don't really have the means to kind of share with everyone kind of what you're going through. I think a lot of people face discrimination silently. I think a lot of people face microaggressions silently, because there's a bit of a fear there in terms of not wanting to blow things out of proportion, not wanting to feel like you're taking offence where you shouldn't be, and also I think there's a little bit of shame tied up into it, that people want to assume or position themselves to be able to cope with things generally. And I think we saw a lot of it in relation to the Me Too movement, where people had lived with things for years and years and years, and it was only kind of once they had built up the power and the strength to speak out about it that things became public, and then people were able to heal. So in answer to your question, I think with my dad, we hadn't really had an in-depth conversation about things that we had both gone through until kind of later on in my career.
That's great. That is really interesting, and I think sometimes it can be a case of perhaps when you feel like you are different already, then you don't want to be the person that's sort of speaking out or speaking up about something else, and it already feels like, oh, actually I'm already different within this organisation. That's really interesting.
I think that there's also a fear of further victimisation.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
The moment you speak up, do you put a target on your back? Do you kind of position yourself as a troublemaker? And I think especially in kind of white male dominated environments, there's a tendency for you to want to fit in and want to, be one of the lads, or partake in the banter and that kind of thing. And the moment you say, actually, no, this is offensive to me, does it mean that you're excluded? Does it mean that you're no longer one of the lads? Does it mean that you're no longer of benefit to the organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's an incredible point. So since founding the Equal Group, what have been some of the biggest achievements to date?
I think one of my critiques about myself is that I don't often take time out to reflect on the achievements.
Yes.
But we have done quite a lot of high profile work within the energy sector, so we're privileged to write a cross-industry best practice guide for the offshore wind industry. We've helped the energy sector to implement their first cross-sector equality, diversity and inclusion data measurement framework.
Wow.
And also working with kind of some quite high profile clients, so Thames Water, Government Legal Department, Northern Gas Networks. So.
I've watched you speak many a times and featured sometimes in some of your webinars as well, and I think that, just personally watching you speak, it's very inspirational, and you've just got such an in-depth amount of knowledge as well, which really kind of does come through, and frankly it is making waves, it is making change. So
thank you so much for saying that.
That's the truth. That's the truth. So what are you most proud of in your career today, and what have been maybe some of the sacrifices along the way?
So I think in terms of what I'm most proud of, I'd undoubtedly say the Equal Group, just where we are today. I'm super proud of it, and that's not to say that I didn't have things to be proud of within my previous career. So I was blessed to be part of some quite high profile projects and worked with amazing people on a day-to-day basis. But I think the Equal Group is more of a personal achievement for me, and that is probably intrinsically linked to the sacrifices that I've had to make. And we spoke earlier on about kind of the salary sacrifice in leaving quite a well-paid career, a well-paid job, to found the Equal Group, where there was no guarantee of income, no guarantee of personal remuneration. And I guess where we are now is very different to when we started, and that does fill me with pride. And I'm pleased with kind of the people that we've worked with along the way, the difference that we've managed to make within companies, within the individuals' lives, and also the team. You know, the team is a super talented, super amazing team, and I'm proud of each and every one of them.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, and I can totally relate to you. You know, I came from that corporate environment as well, and I thought, no, I feel really passionate about founding Harper Fox Partners, and we want to make waves, you know, within the EDI space, within sustainability and within quality leadership. And I was like, I can absolutely see the gaps here for a search firm. And did really exactly the same thing as you, and thought, no, I just feel it inside, and I'm gonna take that step back, and I'm gonna found this. And it was literally over my kitchen table for a long time, you know, and it is a bit of a shock to the system. But when you're so passionate about what you're doing, and you kind of, you know, you feel it, and as soon as you start to get the engagement from others, and like you said, build that team that share that vision as well, it is such a powerful thing. So what does diversity mean to you?
I think for me, diversity is fundamental to life. You know, no two people are the same.
Yes.
It would be unreasonable of us to expect two people to be the same. We've all got different backgrounds, different experiences, different ways of doing things. And often when we go into organisations and we talk about diversity, the automatic assumption is that we're talking about race or gender or sexual orientation. And really it's doing that work to dig deeper, to say actually you can have two people that are exactly the same gender, exactly the same ethnicity, exactly the same sexual orientation, but have had markedly different journeys in life. So for me, diversity is just a fact of life. We're all different.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, and I think you're absolutely right. It's about bringing diverse perspectives to the table. You know, people come from different places, different ideas, ultimately.
Definitely.
So, we've just touched upon this, but from your perspective, why is diversity and inclusion important in the workplace?
Yeah, I think just touching on the premise that diversity is a fact of life, our workplaces should reflect life as much as possible. And I think it would be ridiculous of us to assume that within a workplace we could meet the needs of society or add value to society whilst not reflecting society. There needs to be a deliberate move to ensure that we are considering a more holistic vision of what society looks like within our workplaces, and catering for everybody within, so whether it be clients, whether it be consumers, whether it be partners that we work with. And again, looking at things like innovation, looking at things like productivity, we tend to find that diverse opinions, diverse perspectives increase our ability to innovate. You know, if, me and my friends that have all had similar experiences try and think about one particular problem, we're probably going to come up with similar solutions, similar things that have been shaped by our experiences. But if you diversify that room, diversify the perspectives, you're likely to look at things from a number of different angles, a number of different perspectives, and hopefully get to a situation that is a lot more kind of well-rounded, robust in terms of the end product.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely agreed. And I think the big question is, and you know, what you and I probably asked, especially you, Mac, is how can workplaces increase their diversity efforts, inclusion efforts?
And I think there's no one way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of organisations look for this one magic bullet that's going to solve all their issues, and the sad news is there is none.
Yeah.
It's about knowing who you are as an organisation, knowing your staff, what their expectations are, what their experiences are, but then also knowing who you want to be. And it's that part that's probably most fundamental. So what is the vision that you as an organisation have for the way that you produce your products, the way that you serve customers, the way that you do what you do on a day-to-day basis? And then it's about working backwards from that to say, how can we encourage different views? How can we encourage different people to share their opinions? How can we create an environment where everybody can feel like they can participate, like they can add value, and not exclude anyone? And for me, it's probably looking at it from that perspective to say there are ways in which people are excluded from experiencing things in the workplace. There are ways in which people are excluded from having their voice heard or feeling like they've got a future within your organisation. It's about identifying those barriers and actively removing them.
Yeah, actively removing them, absolutely. And I think just kind of adding to that about really being open-minded as well. And I'm just thinking about, because the big question, of course, that I always get asked is, well, how can we attract more diverse talent or more ethnic minorities or senior females into our business? And it's, well, let's be a little bit more open-minded about perhaps where we are, where we want to be, but actually, could we consider people that come from a different background, that have a different education, that have a different sector experience, and could we employ somebody that hasn't perhaps been exactly the same fit within that role for the last 30 years? And it's about asking sometimes ourselves, I think, some of those quite tough questions.
Yeah, definitely.
So.
I think a lot of the work that we do is to help leaders understand their conditioning. So we as individuals have been conditioned to think certain things. So what do we think about professionalism? What does that mean? How is that displayed? And why then is that important? Experience. So somebody's had 20 years experience. What does that mean? They may have had 20 years experience of doing it wrong.
Yes, absolutely true.
So it's about really reconsidering how we think about certain things, especially in relation to recruitment, as I know that you obviously specialise in that area. There's a lot of assumptions that we make. So if somebody's worked for a good organisation, we esteem them a little bit more highly than somebody that hasn't. Somebody that's been to a reputable university, we esteem them higher. Again, that tells us nothing about what they can bring to the table.
So true.
I think where we're going now in terms of society generally, we have to be open to the fact that people have arrived at different destinations through different paths. And one of the analogies that I always use is with regards to web development and creative fields. So if you want a web developer, there's no point asking what university they went to or asking how many degrees they've got. Ask them to develop a website.
That's right.
And you'll see what they can bring to the table.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'm a massive advocate of that. And something that we've touched upon internally is that we do working interviews, and let's have this person come and be within our business for a couple of days and really kind of experience them, and them experience us and understand actually culturally, is it the right fit for both of us? Do you have the same values as actually we have within our business, and vice versa? So no, you're absolutely right.
And I think that's really powerful because I guess it's one of the things that I realised quite late on in my career, that an interview is a two-way process. As much as I am being assessed for a role, I'm also assessing the company to see, is this company the right environment for me to thrive in? And I think my advice to individuals looking for career options is to really be critical of the organisations. I think we're in a different world now where we can't be pacified by big names and big brands, because we've seen the track record of some organisations in the way that they treat individuals, harassment, discrimination, and all kinds of issues around working conditions. So we need to be more critical of those companies, and our critique will encourage them to change.
Absolutely. And I think that was so impactful what you just said there, actually. Is this environment the right environment for me to be in, to thrive in my career? And I think just touching on that, from an organisation's perspective, how can they best get across or understand actually their culture? Do you have any advice around that?
And I think for me it's about looking at the margins. So typically we find organisations that say, we've got a great culture, everyone loves it here. And what they actually mean by that is, me and my mates love it here.
Yeah. The 3 people I've asked recently.
Exactly. Everyone that we go down to the pub with loves it here.
Yeah.
But really, you're not looking further than that. You're not looking at the margins and seeing what are people's experience when they're not in the in crowd. But a lot of it comes down to the environment that you create for people to be honest. And one of the things I always say is that when I was working in corporates, if individuals or if the organisation had asked me what are my thoughts around the company, I probably would have lied.
Yeah.
Or not participated.
Yeah.
And the reason for that would have been that actually my perception is that my manager is going to see this information.
Yes.
So
am I going to
exactly. I'm going to turn around and say, actually, I hate it here. I'm looking for jobs every single day, and my manager's a bit of an idiot. Probably not going to say that. Yeah. But that might genuinely be how I feel.
Yeah.
So for me, assessing culture is about having an independent view. So having an organisation come in externally and really do a critical analysis of where you are as an organisation, and what the areas for improvement are.
Yeah. And then, like you said, it's that data-driven approach then, because then it's factual then, isn't it? It's like, right, okay, we've got something to work for, work with. So what does diversity competence look like in practice?
It's a good question. I think it's one that organisations wrestle with quite a lot.
Yeah.
So I think organisations are always looking for badges and plaques that they can get, accreditations that they can get to show how great they are to work for. One of the things I always advise organisations to do is to really look at that data, so quantitatively, qualitatively, what is people's experience within the workplace.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of diversity competence, we want to get to a place where people can demonstrate in real terms that regardless of your gender, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your sexual orientation, you have the same chance of being recruited, of progressing within an organisation, of being paid fairly. And that is cold hard data that people can demonstrate. So outside of that, it's hard for you to say that you are competent in relation to equality, diversity, inclusion.
And that is the true essence of equality, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's literally that. So what do leaders need to do to successfully impact EDI?
Yeah, and I think it will depend largely what the leader wants to achieve.
Yeah.
I think what we try to encourage leaders to do is to think about what their legacy will be individually, because leadership is it's both an individual and collective pursuit. And I think individually it's about challenging yourself to be better every day. And I think collectively it's about achieving a common vision. So when we think about things in those terms, we have to think about the way in which equality, diversity and inclusion feeds into that. So as a leader, you will only be seen as great if there is a majority that considers you as great. And that will depend on your ability to identify and meet the needs of a diverse range of people. And I think in terms of the collective, it's about inspiring people to go on that journey with you. You know, you can't achieve anything in relation to equality, diversity and inclusion when you're just serving your own needs.
Yeah.
So it's about, again, identifying the needs of as many people as possible and making people's lives better.
Yeah. And I think something that's probably key to touch upon here, there will absolutely be some leaders that are, and some HR directors that are really having to frontier their company's diversity and inclusion efforts, but actually they're not fully understanding of the importance of it. Actually, it's not really of interest to them, to be quite frank, because they've not really had full engagement within that area, but it's now within their periphery. Is there any advice that you would give to those individuals who might not be fully on board with EDI?
Yeah, I think it's a case of going deeper. I think the fact that people aren't necessarily fully on board is because they don't necessarily understand it in any great depth.
Yeah.
I think for me, a lot of the work that we try to do as an organisation is to take people on that journey to understand how EDI plays into everything that you do as an organisation. And it's not rocket science to understand that people do their best work when they feel comfortable, when they feel respected, when they feel valued. So it's about identifying what are the things that stop people from feeling valued and respected and comfortable. And a lot of those things, those issues, have roots within equality, diversity and inclusion. So I think if there is a lack of understanding, it's probably a lack of understanding of what equality, diversity and inclusion is, what it looks like, and how to achieve that.
Yeah, okay, fantastic, thank you. So another huge question. From your perspective, in the world of business, if there was anything that you could change, what would it be?
Yeah, I think that is a really important question. Okay. I think a lot of businesses should ask themselves that on a constant basis. But for me, it's kind of linked to what you said earlier in terms of purpose.
Yeah.
And I think there's a need for organisations to really hone in on what their purpose is, and also what is the legacy that they want to leave. And that can't necessarily be measured in financial terms. And I think there's a lot of focus nowadays on finances within organisations. Like that's the one measure of success. And I think if we as a society are going to move forward, we have to look beyond finance being the be all and end all.
Yeah, do you know, that is such a kind of wake up moment for me, you just saying that, because you're right, we do always measure organisations on how big, even when we look how big, what's the turnover, what's the head count. That is a question that's asked around our office on a day-to-day basis. You're absolutely right, whereas what's the impact that organisation has had, you know, how have they gone about doing that. And I think we also know, especially, you know, for myself included, but I think especially for younger generations, they're very interested in how can they make impact and how does whoever they work for make positive change as well. So that's kind of a key metric it's tended to be, hasn't it, for the younger generations?
I think so. I think the sad thing that I would say about younger generation, I think we get into these cyclical patterns whereby we always have expectations of one generation over another generation. So we'll look to the younger generation and say that they're more enterprising, more socially minded. But what happens over time is that gets eroded as they observe the older generation. So, for example, when we go into the workplace, we have expectations about what good leadership looks like, and we will be critical of leaders until we get into a leadership position. And then we will tend to conform to what has been there before, because that's the way that we've always done things. And therefore we continue what's gone before. So I think whilst I agree that the younger generation seems more more socially minded, we as the current generation, if I can class myself as that, need to make sure that we create an environment where they can really start to make changes, as opposed to just being conscious of what the need is for social change. No, that's phenomenal. Absolutely, yeah. So what's the biggest lesson that you've learned, and what would your advice be to future generations? It's a very deep question. I think it's a deep conversation, Mac. Definitely. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that everyone's making it up as they go along. Do you know, we've heard somebody say, you know, a couple of people say this, like, honestly, I think you're absolutely spot on. Please carry on. No, please carry on. Okay, and I think that's linked to what my advice would be. And the best piece of advice that I could give is to not take advice. Yes. Because I think, again, everyone's making it up as they go along. The advice that I give you is shaped by my experiences, shaped by everything that I know or I think I know. And that isn't necessarily relevant to you. No, we have not heard that before. That's brilliant. And so where should people maybe get what listen inside instead? Observe themselves? Yeah, I think so. As a I'm very data minded in my approach. So my approach to making decisions is to collect as much data as I can. Let's look at the facts. Yeah, but I think you touched on something there in terms of that inner peace. Yeah. And I think you have to be able to live with the choices that you make. And if you don't feel peace about certain things, you absolutely shouldn't be doing it. Yeah, absolutely agreed. Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Mac, are you ready? Yes, I am. Brilliant. What do you like to do for fun? Play football, watch Netflix, cinema. Nice. What does equality mean to you? Equality is having the same opportunities and access to a similar level of resources. Yes, I love that, yes. What would you say to your younger self? It's a big question. Believe in yourself more. Who inspires you? My parents inspire me. Yeah. I'm also inspired by a lot of the civil rights leaders, so Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, as well as, I guess, a lot of sports stars as well. I'm really into football, so Steven Gerrard, John Barnes. And why?
You've touched on quite a few people there, but why?
Yeah. So my parents inspire me just because of their journey. I think a lot of the challenges that they face, and I think only now that I'm a little bit older can I appreciate how difficult it was for them being relatively young and facing some of the things that they face. And I think I also was a super ungrateful kid.
Really?
So I feel like now that I understand them more, I need to be more grateful. I think a lot of the civil rights leaders went through times that we couldn't imagine, with less resources than we have now. We've got social media. They didn't even have like constant electricity and things like that.
Yeah.
And sports stars, again, because I love sports, but I think the ability to use your talents and bring joy to so many people is talent in itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. What makes an exceptional leader?
I think I'm still trying to understand this, but I think the ability to positively impact as many people as possible,
Yes.
or whoever comes into contact with you.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. What does sustainability mean to you?
Oh, so another.
Could just be in a couple of words.
Yeah, sustainability for me is leaving a positive legacy, whether that's generationally, whether that's societally. Just making sure that there's something there for other people to pick up and build on.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Tell us a motivational word or phrase to inspire others.
Yeah, so it was a quote by Dave Chappelle.
Okay.
And it says, "Only my efforts are my own. The
Yeah.
results have nothing to do with me."
That's very thought-provoking as well. Yeah, that's really good, yeah. What does that mean to you? Sorry, this is just slightly outside of this.
What that
Just
means,
out of interest, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a good challenge. So what that means to me is that I'm only responsible for the way that I react in situations, the work that I put in. And one of the things I always say of kind of work is that we need to do it without expectation. So for me, even with the work that I do on a day-to-day basis, I can't be responsible for how that's received. I can only be responsible for the energy that I put into it.
Yeah.
So the world owes me nothing. I came into the world naked, born into a pretty poor family.
Yeah.
So anything above that is success. And I think living itself is success.
Absolutely. And that's when you go fundamentally back to the question of what is success to you? What does success mean to you? And that's the whole...
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think for me personally, success is...
I didn't mean to. You can't go for it. I didn't mean to. It was just me.
No, I think for me, success is loving what I do, loving myself,
yes,
and loving the people that I do it with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Maggie, it's been an honour to interview you. It's been really thought-provoking, really humbling, and really inspirational. So we're really grateful to have had you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I think this is amazing. I think what you're doing is really impactful.
Oh, thank you.
Great.
That's so good. Thank you. Yeah. Honestly, it's been a real pleasure.